April 1942. The Pacific was dying. 4 months had passed since Pearl Harbor, and the United States was still reeling. Battleships lay rusting in the harbor. The nation that once believed itself untouchable was now bleeding across the Pacific theater. In Tokyo, radio broadcasts mocked America daily. They called it a crippled giant, loud but powerless. Japanese officers toasted to a war they believed already won. But somewhere in Washington, D.C., a different kind of toast was being made. Not to victory, to vengeance. Lieutenant Colonel James H. Doolittle, engineer, pilot, and legend, was called into a private meeting at the War Department. General Henry Hap Arnold spoke plainly. "We need to hit Japan, fast." The idea sounded insane. No American bomber could reach the Japanese mainland from any base then held. The nearest Allied airfield was thousands of miles away. But Doolittle didn't flinch. He thought in terms of possibility, not distance. What if he proposed a bomber could take off from an aircraft carrier, strike Japan, and then continue west to friendly fields in China? No one had ever tried it. No one even believed a twin-engine bomber could lift off from a carrier deck. Arnold simply said, "Prove it." Doolittle's choice of aircraft was daring. He picked the North American B-25 Mitchell, a medium mower known for toughness and long range. To make it fly off a carrier, crews stripped it down, removed defensive guns, reduced armor, added extra fuel tanks. The bomb bay was packed with just enough ordnance to hurt Japan's industrial pride. 4 500-pound bombs per plane, 16 bombers, 80 men, a one-way mission. Every man who volunteered knew the odds. Fuel projections showed they wouldn't have enough to make it to China. Most expected to crash or be captured. Still, not one refused. As Doolittle told them, this isn't about damage. It's about message. By April 1st, 1942, the modified B-25s were loaded aboard the carrier USS Hornet CV-8 in Alameda, California. Each plane barely fit. Their wings hung over the deck's edge. As the Hornet sailed west, no one aboard the ship's escort fleet knew its purpose. The men trained in secret, practicing short-run takeoffs on tiny airstrips, simulating the carrier deck. By the time they reached the Pacific, each pilot could lift the bomber into the air within 500 feet, barely the length of a football field. On April 18th, 650 miles east of Japan, the task force was spotted by a Japanese patrol boat. The mission had been compromised. Doolittle gathered his crews. He had two choices: abort or launch immediately from twice the planned distance. Fuel math said it was impossible, but he didn't hesitate. Launch all planes. The first B-25 rolled to the deck's edge, its nose nearly dipping into the sea. Waves crashed over the bow. The carrier pitched in rough water. At 8:20 a.m., Doolittle's bomber roared forward, engines screaming, wheels bouncing. For a moment it looked doomed. Then, like a miracle, it lifted. One by one, 15 more B-25s followed. Each rose into the wind and disappeared into the gray horizon. Sailors below cheered, tears in their eyes. They knew most of those men wouldn't come back. Hours later, Japanese radar picked up the intruders, unidentified aircraft approaching from the east. At first, the operators laughed. No enemy bomber could possibly have flown that far. It had to be a training error. Then the bombs fell. Across Tokyo, Yokohama, Kobe, and Nagoya, explosions shattered the morning calm. Oil depots burned. Industrial plants erupted in flames. Japanese civilians ran through the streets, pointing at the sky in disbelief. They had been told their homeland was invulnerable. Now, American bombs were falling on the Emperor's own capital. Doolittle's raid caused little physical damage, but its psychological impact was enormous. Japan's military command was humiliated. Their air defenses had failed. The Emperor himself had been threatened. In Washington, President Roosevelt announced the success with quiet satisfaction. When reporters asked where the bombers came from, he smiled and said, "They flew from Shangri-La." It was a lie, but a useful one. The world now knew America could strike anywhere, but for Doolittle and his men, the price was still to be paid. With fuel running out, most of the bombers crash-landed or bailed out over China. One crew diverted to Vladivostok, where the Soviets interned them for the rest of the war. Of the 80 raiders, 3 were killed in crashes, 8 captured. 3 of those captives were executed by the Japanese. The survivors were sheltered by Chinese villagers who risked their lives under brutal reprisals. Entire towns destroyed for aiding the Americans. Doolittle himself parachuted into a rice field, bruised and dazed. He believed the mission a failure. He expected a court-martial for losing every plane. Instead, he returned home to a hero's welcome and the Medal of Honor. The Doolittle Raid had not won the war, but it had changed it. It proved that the Pacific was not a Japanese lake. It showed that courage, not numbers, could shift momentum, and it planted a seed, a determination that would grow all the way to Tokyo Bay. The Doolittle Raid had shaken Japan to its core, but what followed was not retreat. It was rage. The Empire's high command gathered within hours of the attack. The humiliation of American bombers reaching Tokyo was unthinkable. They demanded vengeance, not just on the U.S. military, but on the soil that had aided them. Within days, Japan launched Operation Say Go, a brutal campaign across eastern China. Their goal, to find and punish anyone who had helped the American raiders. Entire villages were burned. Men, women, and children were executed without trial. The Japanese army unleashed biological warfare, cholera, plague, and anthrax on Chinese civilians. Historians would later estimate more than 250,000 Chinese deaths followed directly from this revenge. The courage of a few had inspired millions, but it had also brought unimaginable suffering. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, the U.S. tried to piece together what had happened to the crews. Of the 16 B-25s launched from the Hornet, only 1 landed safely, in the Soviet Union, where the crew was interned. The rest either crash-landed or the men bailed out over occupied China. Lieutenant Ted Lawson, pilot of plane number 7, barely survived. He and his crew smashed into the sea near the coast of China. Lawson's leg was nearly torn off. He would later write the book 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, immortalizing the mission that nearly killed him. Others weren't as fortunate. 8 airmen were captured. They were beaten, starved, and put on public display. 3 were executed by firing squad. 1 died in captivity. The rest endured 3 years in Japanese prison camps, malnourished, forgotten, but unbroken. In America, the mission's impact was electric. The headlines were defiant. For a nation still haunted by Pearl Harbor, the Doolittle Raid was proof that America could hit back. Recruitment soared. Morale surged. When Doolittle returned home, President Roosevelt personally awarded him the Medal of Honor. The citation read, "For conspicuous leadership above and beyond the call of duty." Doolittle's modest reply became legend. "I didn't expect to come back." None of us did. He was promoted to Brigadier General, the first man in U.S. history to be advanced by 4 ranks in one action. But behind the medals and cheers, the cost of his gamble was becoming clear. The Doolittle Raid had forced Japan to reconsider its defenses. If bombers could strike Tokyo once, they could do it again. So Japan's admirals demanded a new plan, one that would eliminate the American carrier threat permanently. That plan would lead directly to the Battle of Midway, the most decisive naval clash of the Pacific War. Without realizing it, Doolittle's mission had drawn the enemy exactly where America wanted them, into a trap. Japan redeployed its fleets, stretching supply lines thin. They underestimated U.S. codebreakers who had already cracked key elements of their naval communications. When Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto ordered his forces toward Midway in June 1942, he believed he was hunting the same carriers that had launched the Doolittle Raid. Instead, he was walking into ambush. Within days, 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, were sunk. The backbone of Japan's naval air power was gone. Midway turned the tide of the Pacific, and it all began with 16 B-25s flying into the unknown. For Doolittle, the mission became a burden as much as a badge. He often said that every medal he wore was bought by men who didn't come home. In private, he wept for the Chinese civilians who paid the price for his success. But he also understood what the raid had meant, not to him, but to history. It had proven something larger than strategy, that courage, when combined with innovation, could change the balance of a war. Years later, when asked what he remembered most from that day, Doolittle paused. He didn't mention Tokyo. He didn't mention the medals. He said quietly, "The faces of my men on that deck, waiting for takeoff. They knew the odds. They went anyway." That was the legacy of the Doolittle Raid. Not destruction, but defiance. A message written not in bombs, but in bravery. After the Doolittle Raid, the B-25 was no longer just a bomber. It had become a symbol, a machine that could strike where no one thought possible. But for the airmen who would carry it forward, the raid was only the beginning. Across the Pacific, the war had changed shape. The United States was no longer defending, it was advancing, island by island, through jungles, coral reefs, and skies thick with danger. And leading that advance were squadrons of B-25s. They called them Mitchells, tough, loud, and rugged as the men who flew them. The B-25 wasn't the biggest or the fastest bomber in the U.S. arsenal, but it was adaptable. It could take off from short airstrips hacked out of jungle mud, fly through storms that grounded larger aircraft, and hit targets with precision at altitudes where the enemy didn't expect them. Engineers quickly turned the Doolittle prototype into a battlefield workhorse. New variants rolled off assembly lines, the B-25 CD and J, each more deadly than the last. The Pacific demanded a new kind of warplane, one that could fly low, fast, and hit hard. The B-25 fit that role perfectly. In the jungles of New Guinea, where thick clouds and rough terrain made high-altitude bombing impossible, the B-25 crews invented a brutal new tactic: skip bombing. Instead of dropping bombs from the sky, they flew just above the treetops, skimming waves and blasting enemy ships at point-blank range. They released bombs so low they bounced off the water like stones, straight into Japanese transports and destroyers. The results were devastating. It wasn't clean, it wasn't elegant, but it worked. B-25 squadrons ripped apart supply convoys, isolated garrisons, and shattered Japan's ability to move troops between islands. By 1943, the B-25 was everywhere. In the Solomon Islands, it strafed jungle airstrips. In Burma, it hunted supply lines along the Burma Road. In the Philippines, it became the spearhead of General MacArthur's return. Each Mitchell carried a new kind of weaponry, 8 to 12.50 caliber machine guns in the nose alone. Some versions were modified to mount a 75mm cannon, turning them into flying gunships. When the B-25 roared in low, it sounded like thunder. When it fired, it was thunder-made metal. One of its most famous squadrons was the 345th Bomb Group, nicknamed Air Apaches. Their aircraft bore shark mouths and jagged lightning bolts across their noses, a warning to anyone below. They flew so low that palm fronds stuck to their wings after missions. Their motto was simple: attack, attack, attack. On April 12, 1943, one of those B-25s carried out a mission that stunned the world. Flying off Bougainville, a formation of Mitchells spotted a Japanese transport convoy. Among the ships was a sleek gray vessel, the command ship of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the mastermind behind Pearl Harbor. American code breakers had intercepted his travel plans. The 339th Fighter Squadron and B-25s from the 17th Bomb Group were sent to intercept him. At 9:34 a.m., they found the convoy. P-38 fighters swooped in from the clouds, and the B-25s dove from behind. Within seconds, Yamamoto's transport was hit. It crashed into the jungle, exploding in a column of black smoke. The man who had planned Pearl Harbor was dead, taken down by the same aircraft that had once struck Tokyo. The B-25's legend grew with every campaign. Its crews were young, most in their early 20s, but their skill and ferocity turned the tide in countless battles. In the Battle of the Bismarck Sea, B-25s obliterated an entire Japanese troop convoy trying to reinforce New Guinea. 8 transports and 4 destroyers were sunk in a single day. The raid proved that low-level precision could destroy fleets without risking carriers. The Japanese Navy called it the day the sea caught fire. Inside the cockpit, the B-25 was all noise and heat. Engines screamed at full throttle, shell casings clattered across the floor, and the air smelled of oil and cordite. Gunners fired until the barrels smoked. Pilots wiped sweat from their goggles as tracer rounds streaked past the nose. Each mission was a gamble, a contest of nerve between man, machine, and gravity. But the crews trusted their Mitchells. The aircraft could take punishment and keep flying, even with holes big enough to crawl through. One pilot, after limping home on one engine with half his tail missing, wrote in his logbook, "She's ugly, she's loud, and she's perfect." By 1944, the B-25 had become the most versatile bomber in the Pacific. It attacked ships, jungles, railways, bridges, anything that kept Japan's war machine alive. And with every sortie, it carried the same spirit born on the deck of the USS Hornet: daring, innovation, and pure defiance. The Doolittle Raid had proved the impossible. The Pacific campaigns made it unstoppable. From the skies over New Guinea to the clouds above Burma, the B-25 turned the art of war into an act of willpower, the machine that refused to die, flown by men who refused to quit. By 1944, victory finally seemed within reach. But in the Pacific, every mile had to be paid for in blood. The jungles of New Guinea, the Philippines, and Borneo were vast green labyrinths that swallowed men and machines alike. For the bomber crews who flew there, the war was not fought above the clouds anymore. It lived in the haze of heat, rain, and fear below. The B-25 Mitchell had become the heartbeat of the air war. Thousands of them now roared from rough airstrips carved into jungle hillsides. They flew in pairs, in squadrons, in endless waves, low, fast, and lethal. They were no longer just bombers. They were hunters. At Leyte Gulf, the greatest naval battle in history unfolded below them. While the U.S. Navy clashed with Japan's remaining fleets, B-25s struck the enemy from the air. They hit convoys in the narrow Philippine channels, strafed fleeing ships, and blasted ammunition dumps that lit the night like new suns. Every mission blurred together. The rumble of engines, the smell of sweat and cordite, the rattle of .50 caliber fire. From the cockpit, the jungle looked endless, a living, breathing monster stretching to the horizon. And somewhere down there, every enemy position could shoot back. For the men of the 345th Air Apaches and the 38th Sunsetters, the jungle war was a test of endurance. Flying at treetop height meant branches sometimes scraped the wings. Birds struck the glass. Flak burst so close it rattled the bones. Crews learned to live minute to minute. A single mistake, a clipped ridge, a jammed gun, a moment's loss of focus meant vanishing into the canopy, never to be found. The Pacific was littered with their wrecks, aluminum ghosts tangled in vines. engines rusting beside forgotten rivers. Even today, locals still stumble upon them. Moss-covered shells of Mitchells resting where they fell, silent memorials to crews who never made it home. Each mission pushed the aircraft harder. Engines overheated in the tropical sun, humidity corroded instruments. Mechanics worked shirtless through monsoon rain, patching bullet holes with whatever scrap metal they could find. And still the planes flew. In Mindanao and Okinawa, B-25s hunted enemy barges at night, guided only by moonlight and the faint glow of burning villages. They dropped paraflares, then dove straight into the light, raking shore batteries with gunfire. When Japanese soldiers heard the twin-engine drone, they called it the Devil's Buzz. By the time they saw the plane, it was already firing. In the Philippines, the Mitchell earned another legend. On March 4, 1945, Captain Ralph Chelly's 38th Bomb Group attacked a heavily defended airfield at Wewak. Flak tore through his right engine and set the fuselage ablaze. Instead of breaking formation, Chelly stayed level, leading his squadron through the attack before his plane crashed into the sea. His crew didn't survive, but their bombs destroyed every hangar on the base. He was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. That kind of courage became routine in the Pacific. Every B-25 pilot knew that survival was measured not in missions, but in luck. As the Allied advance pushed closer to Japan, the Mitchell's range became both its strength and its curse. Long flights over open ocean meant hours of silence, no radio chatter, just the steady heartbeat of two engines and the knowledge that one failure could mean death by drowning or capture. Rescue planes sometimes found only oil slicks, other times nothing at all. The sea was as merciless as the enemy. For the Japanese, the sight of the B-25 had become a symbol of inevitability. They could shoot one down, even 10, but more always came. Every island they lost, every harbor destroyed, every convoy sunk. Somewhere a Mitchell had been there first. By 1945, the B-25 had fought across every corner of the Pacific, from the coral beaches of Tarawa to the volcanic ridges of Okinawa. It had bombed bridges in Burma, strafed trains in Thailand, and hunted submarines in the South China Sea. When Japan finally surrendered that August, thousands of Mitchells sat parked on muddy airstrips, their engines ticking cool. In the silence, their crews, gaunt and sunburned, walked away from the machines that had carried them through hell. Some wept. Some simply looked back one last time before boarding the ships home. In peacetime, the B-25's role faded, but its legend did not. Many were sold, scrapped, or left to rot under tropical rain. Yet a few survived, rebuilt for air shows, repainted in war colors, flown in tribute to the men who had once ridden them through fire. To this day, when one of them flies overhead, the sound is unmistakable. A deep, rolling growl that seems to carry the echo of all those who never returned. By mid-1945, the Pacific War was collapsing. Japan's cities burned nightly under waves of B-29s. The Imperial Navy was shattered, the army starving, and the skies belonged to America. But even in those final months, the B-25 Mitchell kept flying. It no longer made headlines. Its missions weren't celebrated, but while the world looked toward Tokyo and Hiroshima, the B-25 was still out there, fighting, rescuing, and watching history close in. On Okinawa, the last great battle of the Pacific, B-25s became lifelines for soldiers on the ground. They bombed cave positions, supply depots, and artillery nests hidden among cliffs and forests. When kamikazes struck U.S. ships offshore, Mitchells flew low-level sweeps over airfields in Kyushu, hunting down the remaining suicide planes before they could launch. It was dangerous, exhausting work, the kind no one would remember but everyone depended on. For the airmen, there was no glory left in it, just routine, fatigue, and survival. Still, the Mitchells kept flying. Day after day, mission after mission, until the Emperor finally surrendered. When Japan announced its capitulation on August 15, 1945, some B-25s were already airborne. Crews received the message mid-flight. Some cheered, some sat in silence, others turned their planes toward home, tears streaking down faces smudged with oil and salt. For 4 years they had lived inside the roar of those engines. Now, suddenly, there was silence. At airfields from the Philippines to Australia, the Mitchells were lined up in rows, wings glinting in the tropical sun, their propellers still. Mechanics removed ammunition belts for the last time. Pilots filled out final mission logs. War had ended, but no one yet knew how to live without it. In the years that followed, the B-25 found new life. Some became training aircraft for young pilots entering the new U.S. Air Force. Others were stripped of guns and converted into cargo or reconnaissance planes. A few were sold to civilian airlines, ferrying mail and passengers across post-war America, and hundreds more were left behind, abandoned on islands, overgrown by vines, forgotten. For decades, they rusted quietly under tropical rain, their aluminum skin dulled, their names and nose art fading into the green. Yet for those who remembered, the Mitchell was never just a plane. It was a symbol of defiance, of men who flew the impossible and made it possible. In the 1950s and 60s, as the world changed and jet engines replaced propellers, a handful of B-25s were rescued from scrap yards. Veterans bought them with their own money, restored them, and flew them at reunions. At air shows, the deep, rolling thunder of their engines would draw silence from crowds. Old men stood with hands in pockets, watching the plane that had once carried them through hell. Some smiled, some cried. For them, the Mitchell wasn't just a machine. It was a memory, a promise kept, a ghost returned to the sky. Historians would later call the B-25 the bomber that could do anything. It had fought in every major theater of the Second World War, from North Africa to Burma, from Italy to the Pacific. It had bombed ships, bridges, trains, and fortresses. It had carried generals, rescued prisoners, and even hunted submarines. No other bomber was used in so many roles by so many nations. But its true legacy was never written in statistics or blueprints. It was written in the courage of those who flew it, men who faced overwhelming odds in a machine that always brought them home, or at least tried to. When asked why he chose the B-25 for his daring 1942 mission, Jimmy Doolittle once said, "Because it could take off short, hit hard, and forgive a mistake. That forgiveness saved lives. Its balance, power, and toughness gave it a human quality, a kind of loyalty between man and machine." Decades later, when one of the surviving raiders looked at a restored Mitchell gleaming in the sun, he whispered, "That sound, it's the sound of home." Today, less than 100 B-25s remain airworthy. Each is a flying relic, a heartbeat from another time. When one lifts from a runway, people stop to watch. The engines thunder, the wings tremble, and for a moment the air smells again of oil, sweat, and fear. In that sound lies every memory of the Pacific, the jungles, the islands, the endless blue sea. The ghosts of pilots who never came back still ride that wind, unseen but present, in every echo of the Mitchell's roar.